Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What are the backstates? Similar to the backrooms, the backstates are the forbidden 91 states located between Nebraska and Iowa. The space which these states occupy appears to be beyond baseline reality, similar to how wormholes work. Difficult to enter normally, they are known for paranormal phenomena and often strange cultures and geography. A map of the backstates has been provided in the description below.
I live on the eastern edge of Nebraska, and the farthest I have gone into the backstates is the edge of New Nantes. Everything just gets weird part way through Ronald. Everything turns into basic geometric shapes, and lots of indecipherable symbols. I really can't describe it any better than that. The sky changes colors every once in a while. I don't really know if there was a specific interval. I was too mesmerized by everything else. It changed from what you might describe as blue to maybe an orange. There was something off about it. Laws of physics aren't the same. I tried to take pictures but nothing electronic. I'm guess electromagnetism changes past the threshold, would work. I tried film, it just turned out black when cured. How I stayed alive or my car kept running I do not know. Had I been driving a more modern car maybe it would have stopped. I don't really know exactly how to get there on purpose without ending up in Iowa or Missouri. It just happens. Whenever it does I take the time to explore as much as I can. I am very curious about Lake Doramos, and the next time I end up in the backstates I will do my best to travel there without passing through to Iowa or Missouri. I am yet to come across any other living beings in the backstates. I did see a vaguely humanoid collection of geometric shapes along the horizon, but it had to have been a coincidence. It was very unsettling when I saw it, but it didn't move. Nobody else I have talked to has any experience with the backstates.
I have family up in Judases. It's a pretty small backstate as you can see on the map, but there's a lot of culture. Most of the culture is absolute garbage, however. No one gives a shit about how many truck nuts you can attach to your dark obelisks. And no one gives a shit how much Judas pride you have. Hell, do you even know about what they do to the humans there? They say they put them in the zoos for their own protection, but that's hogwash and we all know it. The weather is pretty nice, but it doesn't very much, just like a lot of backstates. If you don't like a near-permanent twilight then you won't do well there. The only real draw to Judases is the wildlife. Really, it's a good place for hunting. Humans really are endangered, but you can still bag and tag a few big ones out here without worrying about any legislation. Some other good wildlife include walkers. These guys are really fun. They are large fowl with very long chicken legs and tiny bodies, around 20 of leg and some scrawny fur with one red eye in the center of their bodies. They aren't good to eat really, but what people love about them is just making those leg trophies. Last year they actually put a dark obelisk on a pear for the harvest festival. Reminded me of Baba Yaga sorta. Drones, they aren't clever like humans, but instead they have exceptional speed, strength, and agility. Drones tend to hunt in packs like wolves, and are about as smart as them. The exciting thing about drones is their amazing morphological complexity. Drones come in all shapes and sizes, so you never know what you are going to get with them. For instance, my family and I went out hunting around 3 years ago in the meat wilds, and we were almost caught by a pack of drones disguising themselves as tooth boulders which we were sitting on. I forgot to mention Judases cooking. Like many southern states, Judases has a great culinary tradition, and here's my favorite recipe for the world-famous smile tea. Ingredients: 1.5 cups human teeth, extracted, leave some pulp on for more flavor. Hot water boiling, you need it to be as hot as possible to extract that smile tea flavor. 1 teaspoon ginger. 1 squeeze lemon. Half a teaspoon of cinnamon. And that's it. This creates a delicious savory smile tea. If you didn't already know, smile tea gets its name for how the human teeth can sometimes form a smile. This is some human thing. At the top of your tea, it's an interesting arrangement for sure.
I grew up in Clown Country, which is a small community on Tranquil Island, on Lake Doramos. It was a small community. People looked like corpses. Mostly pale, gray mottled complexion. You have to wear gray coveralls with dark long sleeves, gloves, and boots, showing only your face, with a tight-fitting hood that you wear around your face. It's customary and is just how it's always been. It is, in preparation of the earth sleep, which is from the folk religions that have developed there. Barely any deviation in weather. It's always gray, with maybe 4 hours of darkness during the summer, barely light in the winter. Always the wind blows the ashes from the crematoriums around. It was a depressing place, and I had a friend from Sweden tell me it sounds sort of like the hinterlands they grew up in. Though no one here seems to have any Scandinavian connections, or any sort of identifiable phenotypes connected to any tribes or races of people I can readily point out. They just seem to have been molded from gray putty. But yeah, pretty boring place. Don't go unless you want to go to PRTCs all your life. Pattern recognition training courses for normies on the coasts who don't know the backlands culture.
Born in California. Family moved to Jackwap when I was 12 to the naval base on Lake Frontenac. Community there is thriving, supposed to become the Ronald of the eastern backstates. Lake goes through a seismic chemical modulation. Fish start dying, kids can no longer swim in the lake, land becomes infertile. Whole neighborhood becomes uninhabited, countless residential zones, never filled, just with empty grid streets. Have to live in Missouri. It's not fair, brothers.
Doramos City is fucking creepy. I went there for a week to attend my uncle's funeral, back when I was around 14. The size of the city surprised me, and I'm saying that as someone who grew up in Brooklyn. While there were skyscrapers everywhere, we only saw around 15 people for the whole trip. By far the most unnerving were the janitors. Out of the 15 people we saw, one was the funeral director, one was my aunt, and 7 were janitors. The rest were randoms we saw at shops or just walking around. The janitors were extremely dirty, and looked like they hadn't slept for days. They worked on rooms and buildings no one stayed in until they were spotless before rushing to the next location, wherever it was. I still have no idea what they were cleaning, since most of the city was already tidy, and why everywhere needed to be so clean.
Okay, I swear to God I'm not making this up. I see this post about the backstates for the first time just now, but last night I had a dream about traveling to New Madrid. It was relatively arid, and we stopped in a dusty city center with a large stone fountain in the middle. The architecture was like a modernized pueblo, and I went inside a restaurant mistaking it for a tourist gift shop. Everyone in there was nicely dressed, and it was very light because there were huge glass windows, like stained glass but not actually colored. I couldn't find someone who spoke English, so I assumed it would be too pricey there and went somewhere else nearby. I arrived at a sort of pub, which looked similar from the outside but much darker inside. I found a corner table with some friends, and we were talking about how we were gonna find someone who spoke English. One of my friends leaned to a nearby table and asked this girl with dusty blonde hair and green-gray eyes if she knew English. She said no, and giggled, to which we said, "Wait, that's English," and said, "Is it?" and giggled again. I scanned the room for someone who looked interesting and saw a tall burly man with dark brown skin wearing a Catholic cassock. I sat across from him and we started talking about the history of New Madrid and what he's up to nowadays, but it was hard to learn much because we didn't understand much of each other. It was a very pleasant dream. Anyone else have dreams like this? Chaster. I visited Chaster once. I'm a part-time paranormal researcher. I heard about the Backstates from a reliable working girl that I knew well, before she died suddenly, RIP. Naturally, I wanted to check it out myself. So I got on Route 70 just as the sun was cresting and crossed the border from Colorado. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just farms. Then I saw the road signs, "Welcome to Chaster." I drove into one of the rest stops and walked in, but there was no one there and the lights were off. Some guy woke up or something from behind the desk and I asked him to tell me about Chaster, but he didn't want to talk and I didn't press him. So I kept driving east until I took an exit into a town called Buckheaton. My gas was low and I pulled into a gas station, one of the old style ones. That's when it got weird. I asked the guy to fill up my tank, but he told me that he didn't accept dollars. Then he tried to sell me some slave woman right out of the blue. He said that she was a pure until recently. I was so freaked out that I got back into my car and drove away. I went west and ran out of gas on the highway. I was afraid to hitchhike, so I walked down the road to a farmhouse. I spotted a woman doing gardening and asked if I could pay for some ad. We had a strange conversation and she kept saying that it was proper for her to provide a man with shade while he talked. Anyway, she gave me a can of gas and told me to thank my car for driving so far. As I walked back to my car, I saw my car driving right towards me with the driver's door open and no one inside. I ran off into the cornfield and hid for an hour before I returned. There was my car, empty with the driver's door open. For some reason I spoke to my car and it spoke back. It said that it could read my mind and always could. Suddenly I woke up in my car on the highway right where I has pulled over. I turned the key and the meter showed that I had a quarter tank of gas. I drove home, spooked as F.
The Lady of Interstate 56. Be a non-driving Interstate 56 through northern Yerst. There standing on the side of the road is a pretty girl dressed in blue. Or some say that she wears a patterned dress. Looks like she's hitchhiking and she is very pretty. So you let her in. That was your first mistake. She's trying to go west or east somewhere. She starts talking to you. Very flirtatious. Asks you all about yourself. Eventually you reach a point where she knows enough about you that she knows you very well. Well enough to talk you into doing anything. First she asks you to take her to your family. And you murder them for her. Then she asks you to take her out into the desert. And she leads you off into the wasteland where you are never seen again. He also told me about the boar of Lumpen County, a huge wild boar larger than a garbage truck which lives in the mountains of southern Yerst. It said that it has attacked entire towns and gored to death anyone and everyone it has encountered. Another story has it that it sometimes travels along US Route 10.5, smashing over cars and trucks and goring helpless travelers to death. No man has ever been able to kill it. Or the cutter salamanders, a sinister amphibian species which lives in several of the rivers flowing north out of the Reladonia Mountains. It's said that if you piss into a river, one of these bastards will fly up out of the water and castrate you right then and there. So don't go pissing in any streams in Yerst, anon. I could go on and on, the stories from Yerst. It's a terrifying state. Lots of ghost towns, and in the north, it's said that each and every one is identical.
Anon with cousin from Yerst. My cousin grew up in Yerst and he used to tell us children's spooky stories back when we were younger. Gather round, children. So first off, Yerst is flat and dry in the north and the south is hilly and wetter, giving rise to beautiful cedar forests up until you get to the low mountains of Reladonia along its border with New Tates. So there is a lot of different communities and environments in Yerst. However, since the mid-1900s, the northern part of the state was gradually abandoned due to the weirdness from being in the day stretcher, which is a strange phenomenon that adds exactly 6 extra days to the end of each month except for 1 month which loses 4. It only affects northern Yerst, but it's proved disruptive enough for the local economy that folks just began to drift off. Anyway, there are still some folks still living up there and they say that they're afraid of dancing Jerimiah. Be anon passing through the desert. Here's fiddle music. Off in the distance, real quiet. faint. Ends before you're able to figure out where it came from. Might hear it again or not at all or several times over the night. A man in a big, white hat approaches. Dressed immaculately with fine boots and a red vest. His face is gray like dust and his eyes are the sharpest, piercing blue. Dancing Jerimiah. If you run, he catches you without a doubt. If you fight, you die. If he sees you, he will grin like a maniac and take off his hat. You hear the sound of wild fiddle music as dancing Jerimiah begins to dance like a demon. You better join him, because if you don't, he will stop. The music will cease. Dancing Jerimiah turns and looks at you dispassionately. And then his arms snap forward, grasping you and dragging you towards him with superhuman strength, and his mouth unhinges like a snake and he viscously bites your face off. So you best be dancing. And if you slacken or slow pace, or even if he just doesn't like the cut of your jig, the music stops. And you die. Hours and hours may pass at this relentless pace. But if you stop, so you keep dancing and dancing. Sometimes this might last an hour. Sometimes it may last days until you die from exhaustion. Or, 1 minute you are dead on your feet, gyrating to the music. Then you look up and dancing Jerimiah is gone. No one knows why he does it, but he does.
Be me in 2017. Be living in Oklahoma. It's summer and shit. Decide to go on a road trip with my former high school friends. We set off to go from Oklahoma City to Los Angeles in California, which is where one of my friends GF lives. She confirmed she would let us stay at her apartment for the duration of our little trip in LA. The same friend whose GF would let us stay in LA also happens to have connection with a bunch of dudes who would give us access to VIP clubs all around LA. Get super excited, already imagining myself getting drunk and banging hot California chicks. We start by heading off toward Woodland in Claskle to get one of our other friend who's living there since graduating. I park my car in front of his house and realize he's still not out of his home. We try calling him, no response, we ring and bang on his door and still no signs of life. Fuck it, decide to shout his name out loud repeatedly. An old dude, around 50, comes from nowhere and start berating us. We don't shout here, son. We ain't having no troubles here, go back to where you came from and stop making fucking noise. He then tried to assault us with a wooden bar. We thought it was better to leave than to end up killing this frail old bag by accident. At first I thought this dude was on fentanyl of something, but thinking back about it, I think it's more likely the people in the territories act this way normally. Most of them are extremely racist of foreigners. I'm Hispanic myself. Since then my friends have told me that people in the Woodland area are always making a fuss about being quiet. Why they insist on being quiet we still don't know. My friend we tried to pick up just happened to have fallen asleep while waiting for us, but we didn't learn about this until he called us around 2 days later when he allegedly woke up. Everything is fine again. We travel through the woody areas of Erskine as quickly as we can, as one of my friend is ultra superstitious about the things we heard are going on here. Almost had a panic attack after learning we were going through Erskine and not Tender. It's when we arrive in Lost that everything start actually going downhill. It started with us hitting an animal during a night drive, still not sure what it was, my friends and I didn't manage to recognize its shape. After this we stop the car and decide to sleep until the sun come back up. We slept about 12 hours and when we wake up the sun still isn't up. What the fuck? SWF. We start the car again, the sun is still not rising after 3 hours of driving. The forest is getting darker and darker. I actually start to get bad vibes from this trip. After a few more hours of driving, it's now impossible to see more than 30 feet in front of the car, even with my car's lights maxed out. At one point I get frustrated and I stop the car to go outside to take a pee. Realize there is absolutely zero sound outside the car, the forest appear as lifeless as it is lightless. I quickly get back in the car and start driving again. About 2 hours later the forest actually start getting less dark, eventually the sun rise again in the sky. We are all relieved, and we decide to stop at the next city. We arrive and find a nice restaurant to eat in. Suddenly, as we drive toward a small town, we start noticing huge fucking clouds in the sky, like pic related, but at least 10 times bigger. We end up arriving at the town. The gas station appears abandoned, but still has enough fuel to refuel our car. We advance toward the center of the town, and every houses appear to have been left out the same way as the gas station. We decide to walk around the abandoned town. The houses appears to be empty, as if they never were inhabited. Meanwhile, the clouds are getting closer and closer. And then we see it. We fucking see it. A huge, and I mean huge tornado is slowly engulfing the horizon. I have seen dozens of tornadoes in my life, but none were as gargantuan as this one. We quickly get back into the car and try to tune into the local radio to get info on what the fuck is happening. Of course, we don't receive shit. We go in a perpendicular way to the tornado, without even thinking about where we are going because we all are scared shitless. We end up arriving in Tender inside a nice cozy town. The inhabitants were super nice, and we ended up renting a bedroom in a motel. First time we slept in an actual bed for days. After waking up, we decide that we will actually go to LA by plane and we won't travel the territories by car. Still haven't put a single foot inside a backstate since then. I mean, there's a reason they're called backstates. They have shitty roads, empty rotting cities, and all sorts of fucked up shit going on inside them.
Be me, going to visit uncle that lives in Eastern Drated. Haven't seen him in a few years due to the COVID lockdowns, but the border with Western Drated finally got reopened a while back, so I can drive there from North Dakota once again. Like normal, I take the tunnel off the interstate from ND, cross the border and come across the border toll and the oxygen mask stall. Oxygen masks are expensive, but they're a necessity, so I buy them. Western Drated is the most mountainous, elevated state in the Union, and when you cross the taller mountains it is actually difficult to breathe. A storm comes up when I'm halfway through the state. A rough gust of wind at these heights can literally blow your car away hundreds of miles, so I stop at a town to wait it out. To get into town, I need to drive into an underground shaft, since towns in Western Drated are built into the mountains like bunkers to avoid the wind. Trees can't grow here due to the sheer cold and altitude, so most structures are carved out of stone or made of concrete. I get some gas, then a little bunker carved into the cavern wall to sleep in through the night. The next morning I wake up and leave town. The rest of the state is so mountainous that roads are impossible to build, and the rest of the journey into Eastern Drated takes place via tunnel. Not much interesting here except the giant mushrooms that grow in these tunnels. Eastern Drated proper is full of hills and swamps. It's still pretty cold and elevated, but not anything close to Western Drated. The western part of the state is an utter shithole, so I speed right through it until I reach Lake Drated and my uncle's cabin there. Uncle greets me along with my cousin. It's the first time all three of us have seen each other in a while. We catch up, go to dinner, and agree to go fish ing the next day. I call it fish ing because Lake Drated, uniquely, has no fish living inside it. An attempt was made to introduce carp in the 90s, but this fizzled out. Instead, there are a huge variety of cetaceans inhabiting its waters, ranging from plankton-feeding miniature sea cows the size of your hand to greenwater hunter whales about the size of a grizzly bear. Giant amphibious octopi are the top predator here, that use their great tentacles to hunt the aquatic mammals. Cousin is a huge /K/Omando, while uncle loves to watch those big game shows that are so popular in the mid-northwest region. They convince me to go hunting for the tentacled bastards. These things almost went extinct in the 70s due to the huge demand in the Japanese market, but they've made a recovery since then. Go along with it, set up some bait by putting an inflatable pool full of miniature sea cows near the shoreline, set up camp, and wait. It's nearly sundown and we've seen nothing all day except one of the miniature sea cows nearly escaping out of the pool. Finally, we see movement from the water. It's an octopus. It swims up way faster than I thought it would and gobbles down the sea cows, pool and all, before spitting out the plastic. Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. Uncle aims for center mass and shoots, octopus fucking tanks the shot and starts rushing at us. It's much slower on land but still way too fast for comfort. I manage to land a hit on it dead on, but it just shrugs the impact off and lunges. I get knocked backwards into a tree and it goes for my uncle. The octopus opens its maw and a little head shoots out like the alien from Alien, just about to piss myself when cousin opens fire and hits the head straight on. The beast makes this horrible screeching sound before falling over, dead. After that we loaded the octopus in the neighbor's trailer, with much effort. Thing was heavy as a small van, so we could get out of there, and the rest of my visit was pleasant but uneventful. The tentacles tasted like whitefish and slightly old turkey blended together. The meat was quite stringy in texture and had a distinct metallic flavor. The head is extremely chewy and tastes like roasted mushrooms, the best part by far. The body is very rubbery and tough, and tastes foul to the point of being almost inedible. Pickled tentacle meat on rye with hollandaise sauce is a beloved traditional food near the Lake Drated region, and I recommend you try it. It's pleasing to most palates that may be turned off by the strong taste of the meat.
So, true story, I was once arrested in Oibandona for a crime I never committed. I'm not going to reveal too much information so as not to dox myself, but here's the short of it. Be me. Not going to say what my job is, again, so as not to dox myself, but I'm a consultant for blank. Get assigned to help Mr. Blank in Oibandona. Organization I worked for doesn't give me any details on the state. I've never been there in my life. I assume that Oibandona isn't too much different from Nebraska or South Dakota, the only other backstates I've been to. Get on bus in Sioux Falls. Travel into Nonvormia. Mountainous as F pretty soon. Transfer buses at Nepkins Fork. New bus looks tough as nails, serious tires. Keep going east until mountains get absolutely insane. Mountains start to look like polygonal shapes and off colors. Weird as F. Kinda like what they say New Nant is like, but not nearly as bizarre. Go through Dunderlane Tunnel on Route 9401. Instantly start going up. Like, you would not believe how steep the incline of the road was. Almost vertical. Travel is super slow. Cars going down the other side traveling so fast that they are a blur. Spend 2 hours in the tunnel before arrive in Oibandona side. Welcome to Oibandona, home of the human porn. Travel east till I get to Lassenton. Landscape looks normal enough. No more huge mountains. Looks actually pretty flat. No sign of the insane elevation change. Get off bus in Lassenton. Ask driver if he has any advice for newcomers. Go to the hospital ASAP. What? The fucking second I get off the bus, my skin starts to hurt. Gets seriously bad. Go to hospital, thank fuck the Lassenton hospital is so close to the bus station. Turns out exposure to sun in Oibandona gives you weird disease unless you're vaccinated against it. Have to get shots and pills. When I get out, lady at the front desk hands me a brochure for joining the Oibandona National Guard. Turns out all receptionists instructed to hand out brochures because the state is fighting some sort of war with the rebels. Jesus Christ. By this point, I'm planning to just call it quits and go home. I really wish I had. Anyway, go to hotel. Check in. Guy hands me brochure. Nah. Looks at me funny and calls his manager. Manager comes down and looks at me funny too. Starts asking me weird questions. Are you American? Is your name Anon? Etc. Finally let me go to my room. Call up my contact in OA. Ask if I can speak to guy I'm here for. He's dead. What? Murdered. By who? Says my name. WTF. Decide it's time to leave. Pack up and leave. There are cops entering the lobby. That's him, T manager. Get arrested. Shown literal footage of me in the lobby of that same hotel dated to 2 weeks ago. Spend months in jail. See loads of evidence that I was in the state 2 weeks before I arrived and then murdered the guy I've never fucking met before I even knew his name. The jury finds the defendant guilty. Actually had a good lawyer who appealed my case to my home state. Spent a few weeks in Oibandona prison before being transferred to home state and found not guilty due to irrefutable proof that I was there at the time of the murder. Never found out who the other person was.
New Mexican here. Furthest I've ever been in was Los Forodas. As a New Mexican living near the border, you kind of get used to all the stories about the human trafficking and drug cartels that do business in the area. But it's a kind of different trafficking and drug that is sold in these states. I mostly passed through Chandel and New Madrid. The flora and fauna you see as gorgeous as you drive through the states, and the culture there gave the illusion of actually being in Mexico. So sorry if I can't give much details about them. Though I do suggest trying the sunburst fruits that grow natively on the border between Chandel and New Madrid. The foods cooked with them are unbelievable, and the fruit has a pungent spicy sweetness to it, and the juice is as thick and dark as blood. Too bad fucking customs didn't allow me to bring any over, those dumb fucking pigs. Anywho, I digress. My friend I was visiting in Los Forodas had a friend who was a runner for the Beltran cartel, and I was looking to score some really dank bud grown in the rich soils there, which there was, but as we started smoking that good, he was telling me of a new kind of high the cartel was peddling. From an aluminum canister, he produced a plant that looked like it had been spray-painted gold. I wanted to look closer, but the dude was pretty apprehensive about even letting me get too close to it. My drug-addled ass was a bit too curious, so I paid him for the sample. It was not cheap by any means, but since that whole Dogecoin bubble happened, I made a bit of money to blow on dumb shit. I was wrong about it being some leaves that he had spray-painted. Oh no. The leaves that were in this canister was a shiny golden color throughout the entire thing, and the feeling of the petals were heavy and succulent. The guy told me to go rent a room at a hotel somewhere and chew on the leaf until it becomes a mush in your mouth, then pack it under your lip like chewing tobacco. After a night of smoking weed, having sex, and falling into a deep sleep, I decided to spend a bit more time in Los Forodas. If you're wondering about the exact area, it's a little county along the border of Mexico, New Madrid, and Los Forodas called Bella Durmiente, a mostly quiet place if you keep to yourself. I wouldn't go any further west than that though, else you'll be getting into some real gang shit. I rented a room at a decent hotel ran by this elderly couple who seemed to be the stereotypical tired Mexicans you would see in offensive political comics, but they were nice people. I decided to unwind a bit before taking the drug, just so I can mentally prepare for what is to come. I took a bath, ate a sunburst fruit leather that I picked up from a gas station, pretty good even though most fruit leathers taste like shit, and put on some music. I laid in bed and put the leaf in my mouth, and started chewing. The taste was unbelievably bitter and it stung a bit, but as I kept chewing, it felt melancholic somehow. Like, if I were to explain it a bit more in detail, if you could taste the memory of the day before the first day of high school, or your first kiss, that's what it would be like. As I chewed thoroughly, I moved the mush to the bottom of my lip and waited for it to kick in, whatever it did. All I felt though was my body become heavy and I felt really tired, though something inside me told me to fight through it to see this through. What I experienced at first was damn near unexplainable. It felt like being in sleep paralysis while melting into the bed, sinking and seeing stretched out colors and a warm sensation in my crotch. I found out later I had pissed myself, but it felt incredibly good. After the colors faded, I found myself reliving every distinct memory I've ever accumulated in a dream-like state, good and bad. I re-experienced everything from the warm feelings of being held and loved as a child and the first time I scraped my knee, to the first time I had sex and getting into a car accident. The emotions I felt were unreal, glorious, horrifying, and sad. The high seemed to last a lifetime again, but when I woke up, only a few hours had passed. I was ready to spend everything I had for more of this, but unfortunately, the dealer was busy and I needed to go back to New Mexico before my vacation ended. I'm planning another trip to my friend's house the first chance I get. Maybe visit the desert where this grows in the wild to see if I can't get some back home for ease of access. If anyone is planning on going through Los Forodas, pass through Bella Durmiente when you get the chance. It's a sleepy little town, but everything there is incredibly beautiful. Just don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong and you'll be fine.
My friend and I made a journey from Iowa to Colorado via the backstates. Crossed into Oibandona after passing through Council Bluffs. Here that Oibandona is practically a carbon copy of Nebraska, except the only major difference being the new Fort Dodge Rift. Decide to stick to the south since we heard the toll bridge over the rift was always congested as fuck. Past some odd-looking towns where they stacked caravans on top of each other to create these makeshift high-rise buildings, you could see in some areas how parts had fallen down. Didn't pass a single state trooper on the way through. Next up was Greentext. The sky is dark from soot. We saw this coming on our way in from Oibandona. Practically a wasteland state. The biggest features are the huge train tracks for the massive trains that transport ores from Drated down to Glade. My friend points out how there are the odd shantytown communities set up occasionally along the tracks. Get to a gas station to refuel. Dude behind the counter was a normal-looking dude. He warned us to keep away from the shanty towns, which he calls the scrapmen, at all costs. Turns out that they're outcasts from herds and reti. They scavenge shit that falls off the trains and won't hesitate to kidnap us and scrap our car for a quick buck. Ask him how he survives in this gas station in the middle of nowhere. He tells us that he is paid to live there for 2 months. At the end of this, someone will arrive, take his place, and he'll return home, in his case, back to Lost. Also says that there are other stations like his. They're also tasked with keeping track of the scrapmen and making sure they don't wander too far. Sticking south we hit Tendir. Had already researched the capital Cohen and it sounded safe enough to stop overnight. 30 minutes arriving into Tendir you hit the Blue Forest. Rainy as fuck, and almost sundown with barely any light. It was spooky as fuck. Occasionally our headlights would hit the eyes of some of the whatever the fuck were in the trees. We would occasionally find a broken down car by the side of the road, each and every time nature had already claimed it. At last we hit the outskirts of Cohen. It's a big walled city about the size of Des Moines. We find a reputable hotel and crash for the night. Next morning we're eating breakfast. Meet someone making the trip from Doramos to Oklahoma. Tells us that he's uprooting and leaving for the States since Doramos has gotten way too expensive to live. Also tells us to avoid the border with appends since it's migration season. Don't quiz him on it but take his advice nonetheless. We tell him of our journey to Colorado. He tells us that the journey west is safer up until we get to Garifuna. Just tells us to check our backs, thank the guy, and pack up our stuff. Head out of Cohen. Another drive through about 4 hours of weird fucking dark jungle woodland. 10 a.m. and it's so fucking dark. Eventually we leave the forest and cross the border into Lost. Lost is quite arid and flat, but that's not the weird part. The settlements, entire cities, are all inside these huge self-contained apartment blocks easily a few hundred meters high, kind of like that one city in Alaska. We learn that this is actually to do with some weird law which prices and taxes properties based on the physical footprint of the structure. People decided a good way to cheat the system was for everyone to build these massive apartment complexes. Everyone would pay a fraction of the rent to the owner of the blocks, usually a company, which would allow people to own fairly large apartments for a very low cost. We never bother to pull into one of these blocks since we had loaded on fuel and food back in Cohen, but it was a surreal sight nonetheless. Apart from those, Lost is a pretty boring backstate. We make it to the Discland border, but only residents or permit holders can enter. Never mind, we turn around and head for Yurst. Enter Yurst. Very similar to Lost in the geography, but there are actually normal towns now. Decided to stop in one of these places to rest and stretch our legs. Town is completely fucking empty. We figured at first it was a ghost town, but then we noticed how well maintained everything looked. The shops were all stocked, the roads looked at least serviceable. But not a soul in sight. All of a sudden, I hear my friend cry, "What the fuck?" Turn round to see him backpedaling it to the car while looking all around. Ask what's wrong. Don't get an answer. We end up back in the car, and he floors it out of there. Ask what the fuck is going on. He says, "You didn't hear that loud screaming?" Nope. Decide not to stop again if we can help it. This was a good idea, since we passed about half a dozen towns which looked exactly identical to the first one, also all completely empty. We'd been driving straight for a fucking long time now, but somehow the sun was still up. Either we were just sleep deprived or something fucky was up. Get to the Cloami border. As soon as you cross from Yurst into Cloami, the geography changes almost instantly. 1 minute arid deserts, the next minute Florida tier swamp. We notice there's actually a bunch more traffic on the road than normal. First town we passed through seemed to be bustling with activity. Pull over into a bar. Everyone inside gives us that look. Hear someone mutter, "More Outlanders, sit down at a table, table service, fuck yeah." Waitress asks us what we'd like. Menu is completely alien to us, so she says that she'll do us a staple dish. She returns with what looks like 2 burgers. Bite into burger. It's the most fucking succulent meat I've ever tasted, an incredibly earthy flavor, but it was good. Ask what the meat is. Fryer beast, of course. K? Turns out fryer beasts are these cow-like animals the size of dump trucks. Big part of the Cloami identity is going out hunting these big fuckers. Tell the waitress that we're headed for the Galrafona border. Immediately her expression changes. Best of luck to Yaus. All I can say is keep one in the chamber for the skitters. The what now? She explains that the entire state of Galifona and half of Zachars is basically an ecological disaster. Some genius used black magic and made these abominations called skitters. Waitress described them as a cross between a man, a cat, and a drawer full of knives. We leave and head for a motel across the road. Stay overnight, but I'm restless as fuck knowing what we're about to do. Morning comes, we refuel and make the 3-hour drive to the border. As we're getting close, we notice that there is a massive traffic jam. We're in traffic for hours as we slowly inch closer to the border. As we get close, we notice the massive 80-foot wall. It's absolutely huge. We cross through a kiosk which explains the procedure of crossing Galrafona. 2 or more people per vehicle, maintain 50 miles per hour, don't stop, have a full tank of gas before you cross the border, have a gun and someone trained to use it. We're not randomly pulled for inspection, but we pass all the criteria anyway. They let vehicles go through in groups of 3, all in a horizontal line. We get paired up with an SUV with tinted windows and a pickup truck with 2 dudes sat in the back. We are directed towards one of the gates and enter an airlock. Gate closes behind us, and we wait for about 5 minutes. Gate opens in front of us to reveal Galrafona. Galrafona is again another wasteland. Except this time, You can see that life is struggling to survive rather than it being an arid desert, think Fallout style. We immediately set off and make the 5-hour or so journey across the back state. We're heading for the on-frem border. Occasionally you'll pass ruined cars, old run-down remains of what used to be towns, and what remains of the old road system before the only roads were what linked the states on the east Garifuna to the states on the west. Scanning the horizon, I kept seeing these brown-black figures. They're moving parallel to us. Immediately know what the fuck is up. Tell my friend to chamber around just in case. We don't see much apart from this huge radio mast that was hundreds of meters tall. It was in ruins, and used to obviously be taller. There was also a part where the road that took you from Onfrem to Cloami came really close to us, so we gave a wave to those heading in the other direction. It's beginning to get into the late afternoon when I catch myself daydreaming. I snap back into reality and realize that there are only 2 cars. Our car, and the black SUV. The pickup truck is nowhere to be seen. Me or my friend didn't even hear or see anything. It could have disappeared just then, or it could have been an hour ago. All of a sudden I notice that those figures on the horizon? Well, there's a lot more of them now. Can see them more clearly. They're roughly human-shaped, but they move on all fours like a cat. We're faster than them, thank God, but there's something very unnerving about knowing that if our engine just decided to stop working for any reason, then we would be dead. It's getting dark, but we can see a faint glow in the distance. It's Onfrem, thank fuck. As we approach the massive border wall, the spotlights atop the wall focus in on us. We drive into this really long tunnel and a door slams shut just as we make it in. Never breathed a bigger sigh of relief. Come up to another kiosk, where our car is searched by men in what look like old GI uniforms. We're given the all clear, and we drive out of there. I never did see who or what was in that black SUV. Never mind. Me and my friend decide we should find somewhere to get drunk to celebrate not being dead. A few minutes into Onfrem, we realize it's very much like Cloami. Packed full of people getting ready to make the crossing through Garifuna. We take what looks like an interstate and keep heading eastward until we hit a town. It was hilly, but you could tell that it was going to get more hilly the more east you went. We came across this town which was partially built over this huge gully, like half of the town was a bridge. We find a normal-ish looking bar and head inside. We notice that everyone is wearing either a blue, orange or purple jumpsuit. All have numbers on the back. Dawns on us that we probably just walked into a colony of escaped convicts. We turn a couple of heads, but apart from that nobody seems to give a shit that we obviously don't belong here. Roll up to the bar and ask the dude behind what they're serving. Beer. Ask what kind of beer. My beer. Of course, the bar in the town full of escaped convicts is also a microbrewery. Ask the dude what's with the jumpsuits. He explains that before Garifuna was annihilated, there was a large prison called Dresden. After what they called the Day of Sentencing, which was the first day the Skitters began wreaking havoc across that part of Garifuna. In the panic, a large number of prisoners managed to escape. They made it to Onfrem, and built a settlement over an abandoned bridge. This was 80 years ago, so the people here now were the descendants of the original prisoners. The people seem friendly enough, but my friend and I decided that getting drunk with these people just pushing our luck too far. We managed to get a nice room though. On the wall were posters for whatever existed of Garifuna before the day of sentencing. Rolling hills, trees, meadows and gentle rivers, looked almost like paradise. Next day we wake up early, refuel and bid the town, which we learned was called Free Dresden, farewell. We decided to head south into Binry instead of going straight to Green Rock since we'd heard about the golems that inhabit Green Rock. A very uneventful drive through Onfrem led us to Binry. Binry was basically Onfrem but warmer. Not many people had decided to settle here because the ground was just too soft for any permanent foundation. You'd occasionally see the odd attempt at a house, which was half consumed by the mud. It wasn't even swampy or particularly wet, but the mud just liked to slowly swallow in whatever was on top of it. Only reason trees managed to not sink was their vast above-ground roots that made driving hellish. As we approached open sky, we hit was looked like a solid road, and then all of a sudden we were 300 feet above the ground on this huge bridge. It was like someone had just erased a massive chunk of land. We were suspended on a bridge over this huge empty square-shaped basin. None of us were particularly scared of heights, but it was unnerving how there were clouds below us. For miles we drove over this basin. Once we reached the end, we saw the "Welcome to Open Sky" sign. We cross into open sky. Didn't mention this prior, but the dude in the convict bar back in Free Dresden mentioned the existence of a settlement built around some old-ass ruins. Open sky mostly resembles the forests of Northern California, but about halfway through the state it opens up into rolling hills devoid of trees. Heading into this part of the state, we come across the first sign of civilization we've seen since we entered. A fairly medium-sized town, but it looks like it's from the 1800s. People are still using gas lamps, traveling on horses, etc. They were unfazed by our car. Guess they were probably just Luddites, but they looked human and normal. We park up and head to the bar, or the saloon in this case. Place is pretty dead save for the bartender and a couple of vagabond-looking types in the corners of the room. Ask the bartender where we are. Says the place is called Old Town, and gave me a basic rundown of the place. Says the town has a dark history with magic, the occult, and was cursed. He said it had something to do with the elder settlers, the apparent ancestors to the Native American tribes of today. These elder settlers came from a different plane of existence, but they brought many of the predatory spirits from their plane with them when they crossed into our dimension. Apparently, the backstates were created when they were sealed off from normal reality to contain these malevolent spirits, but of course, it wasn't perfect, and entities can slip in and out, which explains paranormal sightings such as Wendigos, skinwalkers, etc. He says this is old folk tales, but it's a tale nonetheless. We also managed to deduce that this was the place that convict barman mentioned back in. Ask the barman why the town looked like it was out of the 1800s. Tells us that he doesn't know, it's just always been like this for him. Says that, for over 1,000 years our ancestors have lived in these buildings. Meaning that at one point, the town was futuristic, but now it has fallen behind. Whatever, we get 2 rooms for the night. He accepted modern money since it's the only way he can earn cash trading with travelers. Up and early next morning as usual, get breakfast, set off. We're running low-ish on fuel, but the barman let us know that at the tri-state point with Open Sky, Ubuland and New Frustor there is a large settlement called Kalana, which they often trade with. We follow the surprisingly well-kept road to the tri-state. Few more hours of driving, but worth it to see a new place. As we get closer we see small settlements begin to spring up. Further we get the more built up the settlements are. Eventually we get into the city center. Looks very modern, there's shops that you would recognize from our world except they're off. Kinda like those bootleg stores you get in China or other third world countries. Next thing you notice are the people. Everyone is just walking around nonsensically. Sometimes people pause, stand there for a few seconds, then continue with whatever they were doing. People speak in a way that it sounds like they're reading it off a script, very unnatural. The whole place gave weird early, mid-2000s video game vibes. Friend and I pull up to a gas station. That's when we notice the very center of the city. A large skyscraper with a green S on it. Top of the skyscraper covered in radio dishes and antennas. No windows at all, just a big concrete slab of a building. No other buildings around it nearly as tall as this one. With a full tank, we get back in the car and take the ring road towards Ubuland. Entering Ubuland, you're greeted with plenty of warnings about volcanic activity. This state was basically New Mexico crossed with Montana and Hawaii. Not long upon entering Ubuland you find the air is heavy and thick. The massive amount of sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide can fuck you up here. Scorched cars can be seen every 10 to 20 miles or so. Gotta be careful not to end up down the bottom of the valley where red-hot lava flows like rivers. How this had managed to exist right next to a Garden of Eden such as open sky is beyond me. Maybe that's where open sky got its name. A lot of abandoned mines here. We saw a bunch of signs warning against looting. For obvious reasons, we didn't find a gas station to fill up here, so we found a spot high up on a hill where the breeze was cooler and enjoyed some lovely Kalana gas station food. More of the same until we hit Plachi. Plachi is basically Ubuland save for the lava rivers and volcanoes. By the look of the few settlements we passed, it had only recently been settled. Past a town that sat on the precipice of a huge quarry. Decide to pull in and restock on food and gas. We find a parking lot that overlooks the edge of the quarry. Amazing views for miles. That's when we notice something weird. You cannot see the bottom of the quarry. That shit was so far down and deep that the bottom was cloaked by darkness. Didn't feel possible, since it was broad daylight and it should have all been lit. We find a gas station and fill up. We decide to buy a pair of jerry cans and fill them with gas too, just in case we find ourselves in another open sky situation. We go to pay for gas. The woman behind the counter looks about 100 years old. Instantly clocks that we're outsiders, tells us not to stare into the pit. We ask why. Once it stares back, it's got you for good. What the fuck? Pack car full of food and gas and hightail the fuck out of there. Friend gets the smartass idea to go north to check out Lake Doramos. Is this motherfucker serious? We hit the border of central Trankland. Border security rolls up. Two guys with exaggerated body proportions roll up and warn us that the ongoing portal storm in the east of the state is peaking in intensity. Tell us of risk of sudden vacuum incidents or SVIs, where portals will straight up pop out right on top of you and suck you into wherever they lead to. Because of the portal storm, whole communities have been cut off from the main highway through the state. Nothing you can do to avoid a potential run-in with a portal. Our option was either face a portal storm or go through Judases, where humans are hunted for food by the locals and the wildlife consists of giant one-eyed chickens. Portal storm it is. Journey actually goes pretty smoothly. We did witness a portal rip right through the highway a few miles ahead of us. Road was untouched but took about 50 or so cars with it. Pretty fucking metal. Clear the portal storm and reach Fastier. Fastier, of all the backstates, probably has some of the richest but weirdest culture of all. The south is snowy covered, whereas the north is more temperate. Had knowledge before entering not to interact with locals and only enter shops or hotels marked with a green diamond. You could write many books on the weird shit and mythology of this state. It's getting dark and cold. We pass into a town in the lower parts of the mountains and spend the night in this very cozy log cabin type place, and yes, it was marked with a green diamond. Got harassed by a local on the way out. We barely understood him but he sounded very pissed off. For our own safety we decided to forget the Lake Doramos plan and just go straight east to Colorado. Next backstate up was Doster. Doster was the playground of the Doster Giants. Sounds like a football team, but a Doster Giant is what happens when you take the locals from Judases, do some genetic fuckery with them in Healthland, and let them loose. 200-foot-tall troll-like monsters, they were very slow but they could fuck you up if you didn't respect their space. Despite this, we actually saw quite a lot of settlements in Doster, especially near the border with Fastier. Apparently plenty of cryptid hunters base in Doster and head into Fastier and Judases. Doster is pretty safe unlike the other two, so it provides a solid staging ground. Apart from that, Doster is pretty normal, very reminiscent of your usual Midwestern state. Only weird part was the area of Doster which juts out, called the shelf, by backstaters. We were told to keep well away, as the shelf was basically a dumping ground used by Healthland, plenty of biohazards there, and it's theorized to be the birthplace of the Doster giants. It used to be a part of Healthland, but they sold it to Doster for pennies on the dollar with the deal that anything valuable they found could be sold back to them, but Doster would still be in charge of cleanup. Ended up being a massive loss for Doster. Turns out the mess that is the shelf is a lot more hassle than it's worth. We keep well out of the way of the shelf and head towards New Nantes. But not before a quick refuel and dinner break at a nice little inn we found. Lady who owned the inn says that New Nantes is geometrically esoteric. Just stick to the IB 145 and we should make it to Ronald. We enter New Nantes. Sure enough, there's some fuckery at work here. Your perception of space is so warped here that what looks like a curved path is actually a straight line. The IB 145 road seems like it's turning right forever, but you never end up back where you were. Road signs are also in complete gibberish. All of a sudden it's like we're going downhill, but we keep going downhill more than is actually possible. So long as we kept driving on this road we would be fine though. Right? My friend and I discussed what it would be like to get lost in this state. Or even if it's possible to learn to live in this state. As we get closer to the border with Ronald, things start to clam down. Entering Ronald, the first thing that hits you is the smell. Must be some of the local flora in bloom. Apart from that, a pretty normal state. Heard some weird things about the food though. We stop at a gas station, fill up and truck on. Almost at the border with Nebraska. We decide to leave the backstates one state early. Also because we also heard that it's best you leave the backstate in the equivalent place you entered. We cross into Nebraska. All is well, and we breathe a sigh of relief. Find a place to turn around. Cross over the bridge to Iowa. Back in Council Bluffs like nothing ever happened.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.